This edition of Tech Talk is brought to you in part by Telex, the interconnection company, owners and operators of 56 Marietta, the most network-rich co-location facility in the Southeast. Tag TV and Tag Radio. Technology now has a voice of innovation and information. Get it on www.tagtvonline.com. The study of controlling of matter on an atomic and molecular scale, nanotechnology. There's been much debate of its future implications. On one hand, the potential to create many new materials and devices with a vast range of applications, medicine, electronics, energy production, and more. On the other, nanotechnology has raised some concerns related to any introduction of a disruptive new technology. Greetings, everyone. It's Tuesday, January 26, 2010, and this is Tech Talk with Technology Association of Georgia President Tino Mantella. Just what is nanotechnology? TAG members will have an opportunity to learn the facts, fiction, and fascinating future possibilities of this vital technological advancement at an upcoming exclusive field trip for TAG members only, a behind-the-scenes tour of one of the most advanced facilities in the nation, view demonstrations, and see new prototypes and products that have resulted from research happening right here in our own Georgia Tech Nanotechnology Research Center. Up to the Tech Talk on nanotechnology and on the upcoming one-of-a-kind behind-the-scenes field trip is David Gottfried, Senior Research Scientist at the Nanotechnology Research Center. David has been at Georgia Tech since 1999 and holds his Ph.D. in physical chemistry from Stanford University. The doctor has designed and tested optical waveguide sensors for chemical and biological agents with food safety, environmental, and homeland security applications. What will exclusive TAG member-only field trip attendees experience? Tino goes to the source of the answers on this wonder science and on this one-of-a-kind field trip as he speaks with Senior Scientist, Nanotechnology Research Center at Georgia Tech, Dr. David Gottfried.
David, thank you for joining me on Tech Talk today.
My pleasure.
Well, let's jump right in here. I think that our members, our listeners, will have some understanding of nanotechnology, but I'm guessing that most of us don't have the full understanding. So can you give us your version in layman's terms of what is nanotechnology?
Sure. And it's actually a number of different definitions, and I'll try to go over them because they kind of elucidate a little bit. It was actually Rick Smalley, a late faculty member at Rice University, who one of the really founders of the field, who defined nanotechnology as the art and science of making stuff that does stuff at the nanometer scale. And so you really have to understand what the nanometer scale is, and that's relatively straightforward. Because nano is just the metric prefix meaning 10 to the minus 9th, or 1 billionth. So a nanometer is 1 billionth of a meter. And there are a number of ways to think about that. A nanometer is roughly the size of a small chemical, a small molecule. Mm-hmm. In fact, a double helix of DNA is about 2 nanometers in size. And then you get up to the 100 nanometer scale where something like a virus, like the influenza virus is. So that gives you a sense of what is at that scale. When I talk to high school students, one of my favorite analogies is that your fingernails grow at 1 nanometer per second. And usually when I say that, everyone starts looking at their fingernails as if they can see it, but of course they can't. At the other end of the definition scale is something that came out of the National Nanotechnology Initiative, which is the government's kind of overall coordination of research and development in nanotechnology from some 25 different federal agencies, and this began about 10 years ago. And their definition really does sum it all up, because the definition is nanotechnology is the understanding and control of matter at dimensions between approximately 1 and 100 nanometers, where unique phenomena enable novel applications. And that one somewhat long sentence really does have all of the aspects of what nanotechnology is. Number one, that you're controlling matter, because nature has been producing matter at the nanotechnology or the nanometer scale for as long as nature has been around, but it's really man's ability to control matter at that scale that has really driven the field of nanotechnology. The other aspects of that definition are the unique phenomena, which we can get into that, and then how that unique phenomena that this matter exhibits at the nanoscale really drives a number of new and interesting applications.
Well, I think we should get back to the unique phenomena, but let's talk, and this is probably a good segue into that, just the nanoscale and things that are of this size in terms of what makes that special in respect to business and industry and certainly science.
Sure. Well, and that's what I meant by unique phenomena, in that there are a number of properties of matter that change when you go from the bulk or the conventional macro scale down to the nanoscale. So, for example, everyone's familiar with gold, the metal gold.
Right.
In the bulk, a lot of wedding rings are made out of it, and the reason we call it gold was that the color is gold. As you go down to the nanoscale, as you take particles of gold down to the tens of nanometer level, the color of gold is no longer what we associate with the color gold. It actually has a reddish color, especially in solution. So there are a number of optical properties of matter that change at the nanometer scale. And in fact, aside from metals down at that scale, people have created all different kinds of materials, including a one that your listeners may have heard of called quantum dots. And quantum dots are essentially semiconductor particles that at the nanometer scale have a variety of colors depending on the size of them and also depending on what specific materials make them up. And they've been used in a lot of applications, particularly in in medical imaging. And there are folks here at Georgia Tech and at Emory in collaboration who are really developing that kind of field of application. So that's one unique phenomenon, optical phenomena. Another one is electronic phenomena. So there is a new material that's relatively new that's been studied here at Georgia Tech, and this material called graphene. If you're familiar with graphite, which is what when I was a kid we used to call pencil lead, graphite is just a form of carbon. If you take one atomic layer of graphite, that is now called graphene. It's essentially like a thin sheet, a very thin sheet, atomic level thin sheet of carbon. And this has a variety of interesting electronic properties that people are studying as ways that this material might eventually replace silicon as the basis for electronics because of the way that electrons move in this sheet of graphene. So that's another area that have unique phenomena. And a third area is in what's called the mechanical properties. And so people are trying to replicate actually something that nature has been doing for a long time, and that is the gecko, which is a type of lizard, has very small features on the pads of its feet that allow it to hang upside down. People may have seen that. And people are trying to replicate that using synthetic materials, in particular things like carbon nanotubes, which is another type of nanomaterial, because of the unique, interesting mechanical phenomena that those exhibit. And then the fourth area that I like to talk about that I kind of alluded to early on is that the size of nanomaterials naturally makes them interact at the biological level. So materials of the nanometer scale interact with proteins and cells, and so they have become really, some of the materials, as I mentioned, have become very interesting for use in medical diagnostics or treatment of diseases, particularly in areas like cancer, where nanoparticles can be designed to target cancer cells and either be used to image them or to treat them. For example, certain gold nanoparticles, if they can be targeted to a tumor cell, can then be heated where the heat just radiates to the cancer cell itself and not to the surrounding tissue. So you can kill the cancer cell but not damage the surrounding tissue. So those four areas, optical, electronic, mechanical, and biological interactions, are really the four main areas of unique phenomena that have driven applications.
Well, and nano's been, at least for, I would guess, the last 10 years, discussed frequently when people talk about advancement in science. So we had Ray Kurzweil, futurist, here a couple of years ago at Georgia Technology Summit, and he was talking about nanotechnology in respect to how long people are going to be able to live in the future. And it calls a question, I think, in respect to how rapidly is the science of nanotechnology advancing, and is it meeting the expectations in respect to the science community, let's say?
I think there is a lot of people getting interested in using nanotechnology. I mean, again, and you have to remember that nanotechnology, as I've defined it, is really not a new science. Still, physics and chemistry and biology still apply here. It's just those standard sciences applied at the nanoscale. And so what's really driven it is that there are now tools available to both look at materials on the nanoscale. And when I say look at materials, I'm talking about things like scanning electron microscopes and atomic force microscopes, the atomic force microscope really came about in the 1980s. And other types of microscopy and imaging that you can now look at nanoparticles and nano features. And then on the other hand, a variety of what we call fabrication tools that have been able to now control and manipulate and create structures on that scale. A lot of that derives from the electronics industry, from essentially the silicon foundry kind of fabrication industry, where those tools have now been adapted for research purposes to create small structures. But even in the electronics industry, the features in a typical computer chip are on the nanometer scale already. So it's really the tools available in this kind of broad definition of nanotechnology that have allowed scientists who already call themselves chemists or physicists or electrical engineers or chemical engineers to really do new science.
So I was pleased to be at the opening, the ribbon cutting of the relatively new, still Nanotechnology Center at Georgia Tech. And you referenced the tools and the applications. And I know that the Nanotechnology Center at Georgia Tech is certainly one of the most renowned now in the country, maybe in the world. So tell us a little bit about what your plans are. What role will the center play for Georgia Tech and for the country and for the world?
Okay, and I'll do that. I want to just correct a little bit of a misconception. The Nanotechnology Research Center at Georgia Tech is actually not new.
Oh.
We have existed for about 20 years in a different name called the Microelectronics Research Center. That was created back in the late 1980s. And we actually had a building and operate the clean room facility here on campus for about 20 years in the Pettit Microelectronics building. What happened was, over the years, the sort of the emphasis in the research going on here kind of moved away from purely microelectronics into a variety of other realms, including an area called MEMS, which stands for Microelectromechanical Systems, and Photonics, which deals with optical types of materials. And so the variety of research has really grown, and the breadth of the research has really grown. Coupled with the fact that about 6 years ago, the MIRC, the Microelectronics Research Center, became part of a larger consortium of universities around the country called the National Nanotechnology Infrastructure Network, NNIN, that was part of that National Nanotechnology Initiative that I mentioned early on. And so this is now we're currently at 14 universities around the country that basically have opened their doors to allow outside researchers to come in and use their facilities, because we have such unique facilities for doing this type of work, and it's expensive type of work to do, particularly to own this type of equipment. So those two things, the fact that the research itself was broadening, and that we've now become part of this National Nanotechnology Infrastructure Network, led us last year to change our name to the Nanotechnology Research Center. Now, that was also coincident with the fact that we then opened up the Marcus Nanotechnology building here at Georgia Tech, which is now our second facility that is part of the center. Both the Pettit building and the Marcus building are part of the same center.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Sure. Well, we're going to be coming there to visit soon as part of our TAG field trip, and for the listeners that haven't been to a TAG field trip, this is where we sort of go into facilities that are, I always like to say, kind of hard hat tours, but go into facilities where people can get a sense, touch and feel what's happening from a technology standpoint. And I know there's already a buzz about our visit to the Nanotechnology Research Center. So what will attendees get to see on our field trip?
Sure, and one of the things that we're going to do is we're going to educate you. We have a variety of educational demonstrations, and in fact, as part of the National Nanotechnology Infrastructure Network, we are the lead institution. Georgia Tech is the lead institution in the network for nano education, both from at the kindergarten through 12th grade level all the way up to adults and professionals. So that is something we do naturally, and we do it very well. We will give everybody what I call a behind-the-scenes tour. If you walk into the building, you can sort of see what you see through the window, but most people don't get a chance to go down and see the guts of the building. And the building itself is extremely unique. It is the most expensive building, at least that I'm told, that Georgia Tech has ever built, and has a lot of unique features that make it conducive to the type of nanotechnology research that we're talking about. We'll also have some demonstrations of some equipment that I mentioned earlier, the scanning electron microscope and atomic force microscope that really allow you to see down to the nanometer level. We'll hopefully do a demonstration of some of the work that goes on in the clean room. And then we'll also have some representatives from companies that have actually used our facility on a contract basis, that have come in to use the equipment and tap into our expertise, and they'll be able to talk to attendees about what kinds of projects they're doing, what kind of prototypes they've made, and what kind of research they've done here at Georgia Tech.
So that'll be, I know our members are already signing up for that, and it is just a members-only event, and so we do look forward to coming to visit you, and thanks for your time today, David. Really appreciate it.
Again, my pleasure. I enjoyed talking to you.